And welcome back. I'm Todd Vanderheiden. It's International Development Week, a time dedicated to raising awareness and engaging Canadians on global issues, challenges like poverty, inequality, malnutrition, and disease. Canadian and international development groups have been doing what they can, wherever they can in the developing world. And one of those groups is Action Against Hunger and their Canadian division. Danny Glenwright is my guest, the executive director of the group. Danny, good to have you with us on CTV.
Thanks for having me.
I know you guys have got thousands of staff, the global group, operating in countries around the world, trying to do what you can. Let me ask you about the priority areas of the work that you do. I know you're in Africa, you're in Bangladesh. Talk to us a little bit about it.
Well, sure. Action Against Hunger works in about 50 countries at any given time, and we focus on fighting hunger and its root causes. And, you know, people may not know it, but more than half of the deaths of children under 5 are still due to malnutrition. It's a major problem, and it's also one that's preventable. It just involves intervening in the right way at the right time. And so, I mean, for example, I was recently in Bangladesh, where some of the photos you're showing are from. You've got really tens of thousands of people fleeing Myanmar, fleeing violence and the conflict there, and ending up in Bangladesh in an area of land that people didn't previously live in. And by the time they get there, they're extremely malnourished. So our organization was there intervening, at one point feeding as many as 85,000 people a day. That's like the population of Lethbridge, Alberta, or Waterloo, Ontario. And those people needed that aid so that they could stay nourished. And you know, malnourishment really affects cognitive abilities, and it affects the next generation. So it's a really basic thing, eating nutritious foods, but it's incredibly important.
We have been covering, of course, what's happened with the Rohingya Muslims fleeing from Myanmar into Bangladesh, such a major humanitarian crisis going on in the world. What was that like for you, Danny, to be there and to see firsthand on the front line what these people are going through?
You know, it was really incredible. I've worked all over Africa and the Middle East, and I've been in many refugee camps, but I've never seen anything at this scale. We're talking about more than 700,000 people over the course of just a couple months. It's now the largest refugee camp in the world. And I met one woman who was traumatized. She fled Myanmar with her 3 children and her ailing mother, and she gave birth en route to Bangladesh, and for 7 days she was in the bush trying to find safety. And when she finally reached Bangladesh and she reached our camp, she was so thankful to see the Action Against Hunger logo, because she knew us from Myanmar. But that's just one story, and people like this are showing up, you know, with families or without families, but having experienced extreme trauma. We're hearing stories of rape, we're hearing stories of villages being burnt. This particular woman that I met, she hasn't heard from her husband since she arrived in Bangladesh. That's her in the photo there that you see with me. And you know, one of the ways that we're intervening is around mental health and care practices with some of the refugees in Bangladesh. They've experienced extreme trauma, and in some cases that affects their ability to nurture their children and to make sure that they're nourishing themselves. So I have to say it was stark, but it was also heartening to see the work of Canadian organizations like ours, and there are many of them working there. It's a huge operation, and if we weren't there, the death rates would be incredibly high.
It is International Development Week, as you know, Danny. What do people need to know? What do you want Canadians watching to know?
Well, I think it's important to know that, you know, international development in 2018, we're projected to only have half of the funding we need to work all over the world. So as organizations that do this type of work, there's a huge funding gap, which is a challenge for us because we have to get more innovative with the ways that we work. We have to be smarter with the money that we have. We have to build local partnerships. But this year is the G7 in Canada, and it's a time for Canada. We've stepped up in the past, and our government has been really good with its commitments to women's rights and to ensuring that that's on the international agenda. But now's the time to raise awareness about some of these issues, because we're increasingly seeing, due to climate change, you know, the places we work are much more fragile. When we're talking about sort of the historic blunt divisions between emergency and development, well, that's gone now. Places like Syria, where in March it'll be 7 years since the Syria crisis began. So increasingly, fragile contexts and chronic, protracted crises are the order of the day, and climate change is only going to exacerbate that. So we need governments and donors to step up and fill that funding gap. But it's also a challenge, this International Development Week, to organizations like mine to think about smarter ways of working. One of the ways that we do that is to work with local populations. I brought in this MUAC bracelet today just to show you. So in some contexts, we're working with mothers where it's difficult to reach the population. We're teaching mothers to use this on the upper arm of their children so that they know when their child is malnourished, and they can detect that if we don't have the capacity to have healthcare workers there. So it's an innovative solution. It's working with local populations. It's reducing costs. So that's just one way that an organization like mine is working with local population.
Danny Glenwright is with Action Against Hunger Canada. Thank you for taking the time to get into our studios this week. I know it's busy, but we appreciate it, Danny, getting the word out there.
Thank you very much.